Hello. What's up? Welcome to this motorsport news channel. Today I'm going to talk about the latest Formula One news that have been revealed these previous days. So let's go. The first one is about how Pirelli F1 tests boost Ferrari, Red Bull for rainy Canadian GP Ferrari, and Red Bull have conducted wet weather Pirelli development running, which could be key for a potentially rainy Montreal race. Andrea Stella expects Ferrari and Red Bull to have an advantage over McLaren and Mercedes in Formula One's Canadian Grand Prix after conducting Pirelli wet weather testing earlier this year. Pirelli runs development tests throughout each season, with all teams invited to take part if they wish to, taking turns, and data shared among all competitors. While teams aren't allowed to run upgrades on their cars, this still provides valuable information about the current cars, especially on a wet track, given these conditions are unprecedented in competitive sessions this year. Ferrari and Red Bull also got in one day of wet running during the Barcelona shakedown in early January, the only two teams to opt to run that day, which was notable for a major crash for Hadjar. This preparation may come in handy, with the Montreal race forecast to be impacted by rain. I do think that this is an advantage because there's uncertainty in relation to the behavior of the power unit, McLaren team principal Stella pondered. After a few events, still we talk about power unit exploitation. In the wet, things deviate even more from what you anticipate and from what you can simulate. So the power unit remains certainly an element of variability that is concerning, and if you have tested with it, you might have known a little bit more. Likewise, from a tire point of view, it's unclear whether the tires will work within their window or they will be slightly outside their window. And I talk specifically here about temperature window because this circuit doesn't have any high-speed corners, so it's difficult to generate temperature. The surface is very, very smooth. It's one of the smoothest surfaces of the season. And also, it's not like we have had several sessions in the wet. Like I said, not at all during a race weekend for Pirelli to even calibrate as to where they have positioned the compound. So many variables to discover for us that we don't have much experience on the wet. And a little advantage for those who have tested. The temperature is expected to plateau around an unusually cold 12°C throughout Sunday on Ile Notre Dame. Combined with the rain, this could make the conditions tricky with an extremely low grip level. Now let's go for the second one, which is about how Isaac Hadjar was upset despite 0.028 seconds gap to Max Verstappen. Isaac Hadjar got close to Max Verstappen in Montreal qualifying, but believes he could have done much better. Red Bull Formula One driver Isaac Hadjar labeled his qualifying lap as shitty at the Canadian Grand Prix despite a better performance than usual. Hadjar got close to out-qualifying Red Bull teammate Max Verstappen for the first time since the Japanese GP with a 0.028 deficit, and 7th place marked his best result since the season opener in Melbourne. But the French sophomore previously set the fastest lap in Q2, a whopping 0.504 faster than a struggling Verstappen, so this outcome was deeply disappointing to him. I had a shitty lap, Hadjar, who improved by just 0.040s into Q3, told Canal Plus. I'm very upset because I did a very good job in Q1 and Q2, and then I didn't do a good Q3. I'm a bit gutted because we really had a good car and it was a good opportunity, and I ended up 7th. The team did a great job, we found what was wrong. It's good, but then you need to put everything together, and I didn't. Hadjar explained he overdrove a bit, but he still ended up just 0.357s away from pole position, the smallest deficit he has experienced in his career so far. That's why I'm unhappy, he lamented. We did a good job. Then we know that we're quite good on tracks like this. Monaco should be alright too, but we have big problems to fix. However, speaking to written media, Hadjar displayed a slightly more positive mood, especially after a tricky Miami weekend. I feel a lot better in the car, he said. I'm not getting destroyed in every corner and it feels more normal, more like the first 3 rounds. Miami for me in the bin, and now it's back to more normal stuff. Happy with the car, happy with the setup changes we did from yesterday to qualifying. We got a lot closer to pole position, so we're doing good. And now I'm going to talk about other news about how a possible wet Canadian GP could be the perfect storm for F1. Besides potentially providing the first wet race with F1's new generation of cars, tire supplier Pirelli believes low temperatures and the circuit Gilles Villeneuve layout could create further complications. While the start time for the Miami Grand Prix was brought forward by 3 hours to avoid heavy rain and in particular thunderstorms due to local regulations in Florida, tire supplier Pirelli was actually hoping for a wet race in the Sunshine State. With both ambient and track temperatures high in Miami, drivers would have found it slightly easier to get the intermediates or full wets into an acceptable operating window. In Montreal, however, the situation is more complicated because both the temperatures and the circuit layout are completely different. We have cold temperatures and a low energy circuit. If it rains here, it would be complicated because looking at the forecast, they expect to have 11 or 12 degrees air temperatures. and also the track, if it rains, would be pretty similar. In those conditions, it would be particularly difficult for drivers to bring the Pirelli tires up to temperature, especially the intermediates. On Saturday, several drivers, including pole sitter George Russell, were already told over radio that their front tires were too cold, and that was on slicks with track temperatures between 30 and 40 degrees Celsius. On a wet Sunday, the challenge would be considerably greater, Barra acknowledged. "We never had these conditions, and we never designed the tires for these conditions because it's very cold. It can be tricky. I think it would be more tricky on the intermediates and a little bit less tricky with the full wets. That compound has a lower working range, so I guess that the full wets will struggle a little bit less. It would be an unusual scenario. In recent years, the full wet has been the least popular tire among F1 drivers, who generally wanted to switch to intermediates as quickly as possible. In Canada, however, Pirelli expects the opposite. So it is a possibility that for one time in the last years, the wet is faster than intermediates," Barra said. To help drivers get the tires up to temperature, the FIA and Pirelli have, just as they did in Miami, increased the tire blanket temperature for intermediates to 70 degrees Celsius. Tire blankets for the full wets are prescribed at 40 degrees. That should help during the warm-up phase, although Barra stressed that keeping temperature in the tires could prove just as difficult in Montreal. "If it takes 5 laps and you reach a stabilized condition, then it's good enough. You just need to wait for the right window," he said. But the point is that if you start losing temperature and you never find a way to generate the temperature or to regain the temperature, then it becomes a problem because you start to struggle and you have no grip. So basically you cannot run the intermediates with these low temperatures. According to Pirelli, that issue cannot be solved, at least not in the short term. Increasing blanket temperatures even further may help for the opening laps, but it cannot prevent drivers from gradually losing temperature afterwards. We can increase the blanket temperature to 140 degrees, but if you lose temperature after that, you still reach 50 degrees. You have the extra gain for the first 1, 2, or 3 laps, depending on how much you raise the temperature, but then you end up in a very similar situation. It is precisely the situation that some drivers believe could become dangerous. Max Verstappen was among those who spoke out on Saturday. The Dutchman would normally welcome wet conditions, but admitted he is not looking forward to a cold, wet race in Montreal. "If the tires are too cold, it's like driving on ice," he said. "The full wet works a little bit better, but that was during my test in Barcelona, where you naturally generate a bit more temperature through the corners. I think it's going to be difficult here." The reason lies in the layout of Circuit Gilles Villeneuve, where the tires cool down on the long straights and there are relatively few corners in which to build tire temperature. "I just hope the weather isn't too bad," Verstappen added. "If the tires don't work properly, it creates a lot of chaos, and I think things are already going to be difficult enough." Beyond the tire concerns, the Canadian Grand Prix could also provide the first real introduction to the 2026 cars in wet conditions, although it should be noted that Verstappen, Charles Leclerc, and Pierre Gasly are among the drivers who have already completed test days in the wet. The new generation of cars, and in particular the power units, have also raised concerns among drivers, including Oscar Piastri. "These power units don't like it when you're inconsistent, and it's basically impossible to be consistent in the rain." There's going to be a few issues with that, most likely up and down the grid, but we'll see what we get. For F1 teams, that would represent a step into the unknown, as preparation work and simulation models have not provided clear answers. We did a lot of preparation in Miami trying to understand things. I think the conclusion was that we don't know what's going to happen. And when you've got a few hundred, if not thousands, of the best engineers in the world that don't know what's going to happen, it's an interesting place to be in, Piastri continued. To improve safety, the FIA has once again issued a rain hazard declaration, just as it did in Miami. This means teams are permitted to make ride height modifications, boost mode has been disabled, MGUK deployment has been reduced from 350 kilowatts to 250 kilowatts, and the active aerodynamics in straight line modes are only active at the front of the car. Even so, drivers are not yet convinced that these measures will make the 2026 cars properly drivable in the wet. "These cars are not how they should be in the rain," Verstappen said. "You already have less downforce, and a hybrid engine is more difficult to handle than a V8. It's less responsive in the wet, especially with the engine formula we have now. So yes, it's going to be a lot more difficult." A first taste of the 2026 cars in wet conditions would always have been a challenge, but even more so if it happens in cold temperatures and on the unique layout of Circuit Gilles Villeneuve. And the last news, now I'm going to talk about Gabriel Bortoleto, who had a difficult Saturday. Gabriel Bortoleto cast a pessimistic figure following a tricky Saturday for Audi in Montreal. Gabriel Bortoleto is expecting to lose positions at lights out in Formula One's Canadian Grand Prix unless he takes a mega start while everyone else falters. Bortoleto and teammate Nico Hülkenberg lost 4 spots each at the start of the sprint in Montreal, highlighting an arguably worrying trend for Audi and its very first F1 power unit. It's not worrying, the Brazilian countered. We know what we have for now and we know what we need to improve. Most likely we're going to lose positions again tomorrow. It's true. What can I do? I'm not going to lie, be the optimistic here and then tomorrow we lose positions. It's something we are working on, it's clear, it's not pointing fingers, it's just a problem we have that we need to work on. Audi's problems are not limited to getaways, with Q3 eluding the team again in the main qualifying session as Hülkenberg qualified 11th for the 6th time in 8 sessions this year, while Bortoleto took 13th. They ended up 0.0029s and 0.214s away from the Q3 cutoff point respectively. To be honest, very unhappy with the session, unhappy with the balance with how I was driving, Bortoleto lamented. I don't think we maximized everything we had today, that's the truth. Just sliding all over the place felt like driving on ice. Yesterday I was much more happy with the balance, with the drivability of the engine, and everything felt much more smooth, and today it was just sideways everywhere and I didn't have confidence to brake, and then downshifts were extremely harsh, just difficult. Bortoleto labeled Audi's struggles as powertrain related more than chassis related. We are suffering a lot with power unit drivability, with power that we need to work and improve, he added. We are trying, we are bringing things, update on software, trying to make it better, but some stuff worked, some stuff didn't, and we learn from them. Haas has struggled to get its updates working at a bumpy Canadian Grand Prix weekend. Ollie Behrman believes that Haas's Canada updates are something of a double-edged sword with more potential performance, but at the cost of making the VF26 really challenging to drive. The Briton was only able to qualify 16th for the Canadian Grand Prix, one position ahead of teammate Esteban Ocon, who dropped out in Q1. Earlier in the day, Behrman's car was pulled out of park firm ahead of the sprint race to make setup changes, necessitating a pit lane start. Haas had introduced new side pods and a new floor for Canada, which it hoped would increase the stability of the flow underneath the car and allow it to generate more downforce. However, the team has struggled to dial in the new package, and Behrman suggested that qualifying was the first time in the weekend that he felt comfortable pushing the car. We've been chasing our tail all weekend, really. It's been really challenging, he mused. We haven't been able to find a solution that's worked. To be honest, in the qualifying, we were in a much better window and I was much happier with the car. But, it's been the first time that I actually pushed a braking zone or went to the limit in a traction zone all weekend. I could actually finally lean on the car, and now we're uncovering new problems. For example, I was having so many issues with front locking as I started to push. And that's stuff that I'm sure that the others, they found that out in FP1. But in FP1, we were so far out that we were not able to push the car at all. I could actually finally lean on the car, and now we're uncovering new problems. For example, I was having so many issues with front locking as I started to push. And that's stuff that I'm sure that the others, they found that out in FP1, but in FP1 we were so far out that we were not able to push the car at all. Behrman confirmed the decision to give up his sprint race grid position was to put the car in a better window based on the team's findings from Friday's sprint qualifying session. He added that the bumpiness of the Montreal circuit was not playing particularly nicely with his car and laid out the difficulties the team has faced in trying different suspension settings. The performance is there, but it's just the characteristics of the car have become really challenging, Behrman explained. And the way that we tried to run the car, especially this morning, was so tough. It's probably best for ultimate lap time, but there's so many bumps and curbs around here. And when we stiffen it up to make it better, it's then impossible to find confidence. So we're kind of balancing that knife edge. That's all for now. I hope you liked this video. If so, don't forget to give me a like and subscribe. Have a good day. Best regards. Until the next video.